City University of New York. She's currently a presidential research fellow at the Center for the Humanities, where she recently curated Christian-Palestinian archive, a project by Dorgez, at the James Gallery. Since 2009, she has organized exhibitions and public programs for institutions such as Independent Curators International, where we met a long time ago, Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, and the Verdi Center for Art and Politics at the New School. She's currently adjunct lecturer in the Spitzer School of Architecture, City College.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayan, for inviting me. What I'm going to do tonight is something that I haven't done before, so it's a bit of an experiment. And you guys can all tell me how it went afterwards. I'm talking about an exhibition that I'm currently curating. So not one that I've done already, but one that I'm in the process of working through, that I've been developing for a long time, but that has been changing quite dramatically. And I thought that since I'm at an artist residency program right now and have been talking to a lot of people today about work that they have in development, I can also share with you a project that I have in development right now. So I, as Mayan said, I'm an art historian and an independent curator. And Mayan also asked if I could maybe throughout the talk about what it's like to be an independent curator in New York and what it's like working with artists as an independent curator in New York as well, and kind of some of the logistical elements that go along with curating a show. Basically, a long time ago, I was invited to submit a proposal to an organization in New York called the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, which is a very interesting foundation and actually artist residency program, if anybody is interested. And they take proposals a couple of times a year from independent curators from around the world. And I submitted a very, very old proposal, and heard back from them that said that they wanted to do it, and then at that point I decided that I wanted to rethink everything about it. So this is kind of telling you the process of my rethinking. So this image is a pink glass swan, which if you're American, you probably know people that have pink glass swans in their house. I don't know if there's like an Israeli equivalent of that, but it's kind of like, you call it tchotchke. It's like a small, like, cheap thing that people use to decorate their homes. And they come in many, many different variations, different sizes, different styles, but invariably they're always pink glass swans. Why the pink glass swan? And why the pink glass swan is kind of a way to think about a contemporary art exhibition, something that these objects seem rather removed from, right? This doesn't look like contemporary art that you would see in a gallery. It's not very cool. My inspiration was an essay that was written by an American art critic and art historian named Lucy Lepard in 1973, who most of you are probably familiar with, maybe. And in this essay called The Pink Glass Swan, Lucy Lepard is dealing with a very complex question about artwork and what it means in society, American society at the time she's writing this essay. She's looking at the intersection of a couple of different things. She's looking at class, and she's looking at gender, and she's looking at the practice and the process of making art, and how all of these reflect on and impact each other So for her, the pink glass swan is a very accurate metaphor for understanding how artists think about all of these issues. So a pink glass swan for somebody who comes from say, a well-educated, maybe high-class background, thinks of it as like a cheap decoration, kind of maybe a little trashy way to decorate your domestic space. For a working class family, it could be a sign of how they want to make their house beautiful. And so she looks at the pink glass swan as kind of a cipher for reflecting on your own class position. Your own class position as an individual viewer, but also thinks about it as a way of thinking through how many female artists are, at the time, in the early 1970s, were thinking about artwork. So she talks about a couple of different female artists and how they think about the relationship between gender and labor in their own work as well as the work of others. This is a work by an artist named Jerry Allen called American Dining, a working woman's monument from the early 1970s. It's a project that she continued on through the 1980s. She worked as a waitress as her day job, and then also made artwork. And she did this project in 6 restaurants across the United States. She would do a series of performances, kind of making fun of the idea of the woman as the waitress and a kind of domestic supporter and nurturer in the restaurant environment. So kind of making explicit a lot of the female hospitality that waitresses should give their customers in order to receive good tips. And she also did an audio series in jukeboxes in these different restaurants. She interviewed a bunch of people about stories of their work life, their home life, and was really quite radical at the time for starting to make work about work, making artwork about work. And of course she was working alongside many other mostly American, also European female artists at the same time. There's definitely another distinct trend that was happening in the US at the time. This is, the colors are not really great on this, but this is a piece by Linda Beglis. And it's called Fallen Painting. It's from 1968. And she's on your right-hand side pouring this paint, which has been infused with industrial kind of material, liquid, that will allow it to harden on the floor. The fallen painting, first of all referring to Jackson Pollock's famous drip painting technique, but also the fallen woman and what it means. So she's reproducing a kind of male gesture in a humorous way. This is another piece called For Carl Andre. So kind of a piece commemorating but also mocking this very famous minimalist macho sculptor, Carl Andre. And then, do you guys all know this work? Okay. This is also her 1970 cover of, not cover, but advertisement she took out in the pages of Art Forum, in which she kind of expressed what you needed in order to be a successful male painter at that moment in time, rather explicitly. All right. I just kind of, I wanted to give you guys sort of an overview of what art making practices were going on during the time that Lepard was writing this essay, because I think it greatly informed what she was writing about, even though she didn't explicitly talk about these pieces in her essay. This was very much on her mind, and I think we can also see later on in my talk parallels with how contemporary artists are dealing with similar, unfortunately similar issues today. This is a piece by Eleanor Antin. It's called Carving, a Traditional Sculpture. It was made in 1972. It's a series in which Antin went on a very strict diet and photographed herself every day from 4 different positions to document her weight loss. So in this instance, her body becomes the sculpture itself, and her flesh is this kind of malleable material that she can shape to conform to different standards. What is also interesting about this piece, I think, is the way that she very straightforwardly documents herself as if she's sort of in a police lineup, police mugshot. Very straightforward way of producing an archive of her own body, kind of willingly, as opposed to being an unwilling subject. And then here's another piece by Adrian Piper called Mythic Being. Do you all know this work as well? Yes. No?
I think a lot of those works are unknown. They're not the.
Okay.
Am I right? They're not like the usual feminist art that people present here when they speak about the center. So feel free to explain.
Yeah, who was the artist who was
The last one? Yeah. This one, Eleanor Antin. She's a photographer and a performance artist. She's based in San Diego. She was working as an artist in San Diego around the same time that people like Martha Rossler and Alan Sekula were in San Diego, and really trying to develop a new way of thinking about the photographic image. So in the 1930s, we were talking about this today, early in the 1920s and the 1930s, there were groups of American documentary photographers who went around the country to kind of document through the FSA, through the government, to document the American landscape, the American people, and it was kind of seen as a straightforward way of representing reality. What these photographers in the 1970s were doing were trying to kind of both undermine that sense of the photograph as a neutral image, but also remain very tied to understanding how we can take photographs of, specifically of people, how the portrait can be a way of either empowering or not empowering people. So this is one piece that she did. She's done other pieces where, like Adrian Piper, she's dressed up like a man and performed as a man. She did a kind of controversial performance where she dressed up as a black ballerina and was kind of in this persona for some time. So she plays with her own body, but she also plays with different ideas about what a body should look like, or how a body should perform based on your gender and your race and other things. Adrian Piper is an African-American female artist, has been making very, very good work since the early 1970s, actually the late 1960s. This is a piece that she did called Mythic Being, where she dressed up as a black man and kind of walked around New York City, other cities, acting in very stereotypical ways. And then she later would kind of like aggressive towards women, and she had somebody else document how people responded to her as a black man. And then she made a series of of works about that as well. It's sort of her most famous piece, but another example of kind of a new documentary practice in the early 1970s. Do you guys know this work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm answering for everyone. Do you? No?
We can watch some
Maybe
of
some of
it
them
if you want. Okay. Because it's a good piece. And let's see if this works.
Chelsea, you might have to remember the secret mirror world.
Oh. Apparently there's a secret universe on these computers, and you see something that other people don't see.
So,
It gets started.
Apron. Bowl. Chopper. Dish.
This works. It's good to watch the end because, you know, basically she's going through the alphabet using these everyday kitchen utensils. The objects become less innocuous, I guess, throughout the video, and she becomes much more aggressive in the way that she handles objects, and so this violence.
Quart bottle. Rolling pin.
So you guys can alright, you guys can watch the rest on YouTube.
Spoon.
How do I get out of here? I just go back to this. Yes, but okay. Martha Rosler was one of these artists working in San Diego who was dealing with this kind of supposedly mundane act of a woman being in the kitchen, and through what she calls semiotic analysis, understanding the violent and sometimes repressive ways that bodies move in that space. And then one other thing that I just wanted to point out about this moment when Lepard is writing this very important essay about what it means to be a woman and make artwork as a woman in the early 1970s is a movement called Wages for Housework, which started in Italy. It wasn't it started as an art movement. It was actually a kind of social justice activist movement, and it was a movement to try to get payment for housewives and mothers as they're producing very valuable labor for society. It started in Italy, and then there were offices around Europe and also around the United States as well. In the 1970s, ultimately, I would say that their movement was not seen as valid because people couldn't really mainstream America, mainstream Europe couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that what women do at home is actually work and not pleasure. And then this is just another poster flyer about wages for housework and why it's a crime to overlook this very important labor that women do all the time without getting paid. So what I wanted to do was think about Lepard's essay in the context of today, and I'm kind of still thinking through it and what that could mean, what it means to think about the relationship between work and gender and art, what it means to be a female artist working today, what it means to think about work outside of artwork, what it means to be thinking about artwork as work. And this has been a question that people, I think especially in the US, have been having an open discussion about for quite a few years now. And I wanted to kind of survey what artists are thinking through. And so what I'm going to do is show you a couple of pieces that I'm going to include in the exhibition without giving you all of the work that I'm including in the exhibition, but just to give you a sense of the thinking. All right, so this is what our labor looks like today, our kind of unrecognized labor, right? So in the 1970s, it's wages for housework, understanding that housework is actually work, and then today it is understanding that what we do on the internet when we are on the websites of these multinational conglomerates is also a kind of labor. So there's been a movement that was started by a couple of different people, but really led by an artist and curator named Laurel Patak, which is called Wages for Facebook. And it's an attempt, I mean, one could say it's either a performance or actually an attempt to get Facebook to pay their users to use the site. And basically this is coming out of, I mean, you guys can read this, but there have been a lot of thinkers, recently, not so recently, in the last 20 years, who have been pointing out that most of our work today takes place when we're not technically at work, when we're on the internet, maybe even when we're sleeping. We're all working for this kind of capitalist machine that captures our information and sells it. So it's somewhat of an attempt to take that back. It's actually been received really poorly, I think, this project, which we can talk about later. But I think it's very interesting as a kind of performance piece, and as far as it's questioning the limits of what we're allowed to call work. And
The logo is brilliant.
this,
I love it.
Yeah, also the fact that, I don't know, Facebook is a scary place, but we can talk about that later. Another artist who's being included in the exhibition, and maybe I can just show you guys the videos later if you're interested in watching them. This is an artist named Allison Kaufman, who made a piece in 2012 called Friday Nights at Guitar Center. And she documents the performances of these individuals. Guitar Center is like a chain of music stores around the United States. There's one in every city. And she goes there on Friday nights and documents these people who, after they get off work, they go to Guitar Center not to buy things but to play the instruments and to kind of pretend that they're in this other world. It's like somewhat akin to singing karaoke, except there's like no audience and you're in the middle of a department store.
What's her name?
Allison Kaufman. She's based in New York.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Can you just say that whatever sentence you said again, that just bridges between the essay of the Black Swan and then the jumps now with this show?
Mhm.
What you're keeping from that, what you're letting go, or what you're re-questioning?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm questioning or trying to understand is how artists are thinking about labor today, how they're
Any gender.
with a specifically feminist lens, I would say. It's a complicated question because I think that there are a number of artists who are thinking through labor through the framework of feminism, and some of them are in the show, and some of them aren't. And then some of these artists are just thinking through what it means to be a person working today, and how our bodies are used for different ends.
Can we maybe see a few minutes from it?
Hmm?
Is it possible to see like a couple of minutes from the...
Yeah, let's see. Right.
Oh, now it's appearing in the right place.
It's okay. Is it correct? Wait. I can't see it on my thing. How do you get? This is Martha Rossler today.
Still cool.
Where did you take it from?
There.
The corner?
It's around from beyond the corner.
Until you can't see the cursor. Yeah, now you can go to the right and like find the cursor here. So you have to stand a little far. No, to the left of the Chelsea. See the Chelsea? To the left. Keep it there. Yeah. And now you can go to full screen. And there it is. Give me color.
maybe we can watch this later, huh?
Okay. But it's just
The
too.
internet is quite slow.
האינטרנט פה מספיק חזק כזה. זה דורש יותר תאגיד.
We can watch it later.
אולי תשאירו את זה מהר.
We can watch it later.
באינטרנט כבר מספיק חזק.
Okay. This is part of, this is a new piece. It's part of a very large project, which is being done by a Slovenian artist named Jana Kapalova, where she documents what people do when they are at work but not working. It's called Free Working Time. It's an ongoing project, and it's basically stories of people who work whatever job they have, from kind of very manual labor kind of jobs to being airplane testers to doctors, and all of the creative things that people do when they are taking breaks from their real job. They're producing art, and so it's a question of whether this is if this is artwork or if it's not work, and it also kind of fits into this strange place, which I think projects like Laurel Patak's Wages for Facebook are trying to deal with, which is what's the exact line between working and not working, and when is value produced in that. So in the exhibition, we're going to show all of the materials. There's over 60 projects of objects that people have submitted as part of this free working time project, along with the kind of stories that each of them tell. This is an artist from India named Yasmin Pateha, and this is her grandmother, Indiri. So Yasmin is she's much better known for a project that she has been doing in India for the last 10 years, which is called I Never Asked For It, which is a project against sexual harassment in India. So now it started as an art project, and now it's kind of its own nonprofit organization that encourages and empowers women to walk around by themselves in cities and not allow sexual harassment, which is really pervasive in India. This is another project that she's worked on with her grandmother, who always wanted to be an actress and never was able to. Was never able to work in any profession, actually. And so what Yasmin and her grandmother do is document her grandmother in a series of different professions, both through video and through photography. And then I'll just show one more piece, which actually I feel like we should watch the video for, even though it's kind of a pain and the internet is slow, or I can just explain it to you alongside some other projects that are going to be in the exhibition. But this is a project by an artist named Shadi Haruni, which is called The Lightest of Stones and the Heaviest of Men. This is a film it's a large film that she shot in a pumice quarry in Iran, this town in Iran where she's from. And she is performing. She's kind of pulling these stones from the side of the cliff and collecting them as part of her artistic performance. And then the actual workers in the mine or the quarry are kind of commenting on her performance, whether they think it's good, whether they think it's authentic. They're making fun of her. It's actually a really funny video. Maybe we can watch it later if you want. There's also going to be many other projects that we're actually making for the exhibition. Two artists, Don Waleski and Justin Long, are artists based in Pittsburgh. They're doing a project called The Black Draft, where they, Pittsburgh is kind of a formerly industrial city, and after the industry left, a lot of the more talented individuals left, including talented members of the African American community. So they actually started a draft, like a sports draft, but for people living and working across the United States, actually draft them to move back to Pittsburgh and kind of create a new community of strong kind of up-and-coming African-American leaders in different industries, and they're all different industries, so we're going to actually have the draft in the exhibition, and then I guess one of these people are actually going to move back to Pittsburgh, which is kind of incredible. There's going to be a piece by Megan Snow, which is called the Emotional Labor Union, and it's actually going to be a labor union for emotional labor that will take place inside the exhibition over the course of the exhibition's run. So there's going to be like town halls, there's going to be meetings, there's going to be talks about when we can charge people for our emotional labor and when we can't, and how it can be a kind of emotional labor can be something that we can gain value from and possibly make money from. And then there's going to be a piece by a very interesting artist named Zoe Beloff. It's actually a 3D film, which is about the first film, some of the first films that were made in an insane asylum outside of Paris in the late 1800s. And specifically this woman, Charming Augustine, who was a so-called hysterical woman, and she kind of became a sensation because of the way that the psychiatrist would document her body. So it's, I don't think we have time or the internet capabilities to watch it, but you should definitely look it up. It's a very good film. It's about 15 minutes long, and it really talks about how the birth of cinema really came alongside the kind of exploitation of women's bodies and the way that they move in front of the camera. So this will also be part of the film, part of the exhibition as well. It will be a special screening. There are quite a few pieces that I'm not telling you about, just because it's in development. But this will kind of give you a sense of some of the questions that I'm thinking through right now, and kind of the difficult process of trying to make a connection between a historical moment and the present moment. So I guess I'll stop there, and you guys can ask me questions that you have, or offer criticisms or things that I should fix before the show opens.
How do you define labor?
Energy. I would define labor as energy exerted to produce something, a thing, anything, right? Because you can labor for many things that aren't things that you are compensated for.
Those are my two
Yeah.
words of question. Are labor and compensation.
Mhm.
Like you put the word value out there, but I think labor is really it's undefined, but then try to place poignantly within some of these works.
Yeah.
But I feel like as a viewer, if I would come to this,
Mhm.
like I would want some kind of like I appreciate in essays like the beginning when it's like these are the way I'm approaching these kinds of definitions,
Yeah.
especially because this is grounded and rooted within this black swan framework that's looking at a specific kind of labor reference to a specific body, which then looking at it today, now we have like people of our generation come to, we grew up with understanding the body in one way, but now like if you're a young person, you go on OK Cupid or whatever thing,
Yeah.
there's 10 ways you can check a box for your body.
Yeah.
So the looseness of the body becomes present with this, and then so does that looseness of the ideas of labor come with it. But I think labor, it's a tricky word that when you're using works to try to push against, like with the Facebook thing on capitalism, but then using labor within a capitalist definition.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I kind of hate referencing too many texts and talks, but, you know, in the New Spirit of Capitalism, for example, there's a lot of discussion about, like, precisely what you're talking about, the kind of the ways that our bodies now are kind of these free-floating things, and, you know, what can actually count as labor in today's society. I mean, work and labor are related, but they're also quite different things. Like a woman goes into labor, that's, you know, in order to have a baby. And so it's not necessarily, it's tied in and isn't tied into, you know, a capitalist system. I think there's a lot of slipperiness, and that's, you know, it's part of the problem, and also maybe something of a solution.
I think
Answer
it's,
your question.
I think it's, I mean, it's impossible to comment about the curatorial aspect because we haven't seen
Yeah.
everything, and from what we have seen, we haven't seen the videos. But one interesting thing that I did pay attention to, and I think it's less about the gender, but it's more about the reflexive aspect of like artistic labor as opposed to non-artistic labor,
Yeah.
and the kind of double, sort of like a double stance of the artist of like the artist stealing the labor of other people, sort of thing. So there was the work of the artist that's documenting the people playing in the store. So she's kind of good. She's appropriating their art, but their art is not really art because it's not meant for an audience, or is it? So that's an interesting question. And another one is the
and
artist.
that's the question of the pink glass swan too.
Yeah.
Like, is it a valuable object that should be coveted, or is it like just
And also, is she as the artist like doing something unethical by appropriating their art, which is the same, in a way, similar question with the artist, with all the objects that we don't know if they're art or not art or meant to be art. And also in a way with the Iranian artist and the men,
Shadi?
because she's kind of switching roles.
Yeah.
She makes them kind of like art critics in a way,
Yeah.
while she's doing the labor. So I think these are a lot of interesting juxtapositions in the works.
Do any of these artists credit, like with the guitar store, does she say their names, like who they are?
They're in the credits, but they're not like listed as they're performing. Yeah, but they're listed in the credits, and they're not. You know, they're not performing for her. I should say, like they're already there, and she asks if she can film it. And I think usually they're more than happy to, because they're playing like rock stars at the moment. So, you know, it's something that.
And of course, the whole idea of amateur art and what is art through the internet becomes a very, the question of our time. Like, is everybody a curator? Is everybody an artist? Like, what's art? And all these people putting up their creativity to get, you know, the glory.
Well, and that privilege of knowing where other contexts or markets or locations the image of their body or their form or their expression goes to. Like there's the excitement that I'm going to be on your camera, without the privilege of knowing where that footage may go next, where it will live next.
Yeah.
That's inherent to the medium.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point that's...
Yeah, but I think that's the privileged point of view to have permission to take advantage of it. But I don't think that's inherent in the subjects. I don't think that we can make that a given.
In the subjects, maybe not, but in the medium for sure.
It's I think it's a question about
It's a privilege to
context.
know that the medium carries that.
Yeah.
To be thinking about it in that way.
I think that obviously there's a very, very, very long history of documentary photography and film and portraiture, and you know, in a way, this is continuing that line. And of course, there's always an ethical question about whether somebody should be filmed, whether somebody has given their right to be filmed, and this is like precisely the question that these artists in the 1970s are asking, right? Like this new documentary photography, this is something that, you know, somebody like Alan Sekula wrote about extensively, and was actually a very interesting artist because in many ways he denounced the act of documenting others and that power relations, but then in all of his work, his entire life, he produced portraits, and not necessarily of people who he gained consent of right away, right? And so I think you're right to point out that there's an asymmetrical power relationship going on, but I also think that there becomes a point in which nothing can be represented either if you take that logic to its end, or like I can only document myself and nothing else, and then you don't engage with the world.
Which is also an interesting question if you speak about this work, about the woman who was documented as a medical subject,
right,
against her will.
Yeah, of course. And it's totally bound up with the history of film and photography, the documenting of bodies that don't have, you know, for whatever, you know, political or legal reason, we're not even allowed to be able to give consent to be documented. And so it's very bound up, you know, and I don't think that there's some way that we can just say that we're like clean, cured of that.
Pure.
Yeah, pure. Even if we do sign waivers.
So to take you back to the macro of curating, from the micro to the micro to the macro. You started with this text, right? And then you submitted your idea, and then you said that you changed it.
Yeah.
So basically.
Why did they change it?
No, why? No, I'm totally in the technical area now. I just think it would be interesting for some people to understand the curatorial process. So it's like, so you have the exhibition, and then did you speak to the artist before, or are you expanding your research without speaking to the artist? Or?
Well, so basically what happened is I submitted this proposal, and with a kind of historical framework in mind, and the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts is like many institutions in New York, which is incredible, but has kind of limited funding, and historical exhibitions are extremely expensive to put together, even these like so-called
because you have to pay to archives or get them from museums, or
you have to. I mean, most of this material is in museums at this point, and it can be very expensive to get the loans. And so I felt strongly that it would make more sense to think about this framework in the context of today, not just because it's like cheaper to use younger artists, but because in this way I can actually funnel the resources that the space has to pay artists rather than like pay BOMA, millions and millions of dollars. So that was it. And so I actually changed the entire proposal, and some of these artists I know really, really well, and immediately asked them if they would do something. And then some artists, I've seen and thought about and researched, and then invited them. But I think for me, I actually tend to do a lot more solo shows than group exhibitions, and I really like the relationship that you develop with artists. And so to me, it's very important to, talk to them, meet with them, and then see if this is something that will work.
So some of them would do new pieces, or?
Yeah, there's going to be 3 new pieces. 3 new pieces in that exhibition.
One question. Do you do wall labels? How do you approach it?
I don't do wall labels, just because I think that they can be really distracting to the work. So I always make like a brochure or something like that with the floor plan, and then the checklist. Sometimes, yes, like each for this exhibition for sure, each artwork will have like an explanation of what's going on. I mean, I will write it and then the artist can edit it. But yeah, I mean, in the past when I've done solo projects, it's usually I write an essay and then there's a checklist and there's not individual like captions for each one. Other exhibitions I've done, I don't know, it all depends kind of on what the project is. I think this show, there are works, there are some quite long video works, and there are other pieces that are kind of participatory, or the work that remains in the exhibition will be like the remnants of a performance, and I think those often require more explanation, so there will definitely be something.
Who do you have in mind for your audience when you write that? Like, who are you writing to or for? Like for this piece?
For this specific show?
Yeah.
I would say that most of the people who come to this space are artists, because it's part of a big residency program, and so some of it is for artists. Although I don't know, I'm not very big on like art jargon. I try to keep things pretty clear. I mean, you can be clear without being simple. And I've worked many years as an editor for art and not art publications, and so that's why I say like I write the descriptions myself, because sometimes artists are better about writing about their work than others. But I would say mostly artists, like tourists, college students. Like it's usually that kind of group. There's going to be other groups of people who come in for special events, and there will be different ways of promoting the event. Like we're going to have an event with a therapist as part of the emotional labor union, and I think that's going to draw in a different audience, and we'll just publicize it a different way.
I think I'd consider working maybe with a few of the phrases in context of the exhibition, or maybe commissioning somebody to do it, or maybe as the curator yourself. Let's say the word labor is like a key word for this, and maybe somehow playing with all the understandings of it, like all the contexts it could be used in, just to sort of widen maybe the discourse about it, because not because, but I think sometimes this could, or in this case, it could sort of make it more approachable, maybe. Even to people that are in the loop and understand what it's about. I think still, in 2016,
Yeah.
to sort of make it, to play with the phrases in a way, or with
Yeah.
the definitions of these key words in context to the work. That's something that I think could work.
Yeah.
And not to be afraid that it will distract from the artwork. It's,
Yeah.
so or commission somebody to do it if you prefer, something,
Yeah.
somebody that works with text, I don't know, but maybe also do it as a curator.
Yeah. Or as part of the text, like the curatorial
Yeah,
text.
but I think of it as something on the wall or somewhere in the space, maybe before somewhere. But I think I'd enjoy playing with this sort of, even just playing it in your mouth, sort of like saying the word and thinking of, and once it's visual,
Yeah,
it's
I guess,
worth
yeah.
giving it a try.
Well, it's an interesting idea. It's almost like you could have 3 different definitions of it, right? Because the whole idea of like using this object is that it means very different things based on the like your background and the experiences that you've had. And so it's almost like you could have many different definitions of what it means for you to work at the same time. Like there's not to me, there's no such thing as like a universal. And if people have a different definition than I do coming into a project, it's okay. You know what I mean?
I'm just thinking about what to do with the swan.
Yeah. Like put it in the shower.
No, not physically. We
Yeah.
return. Physically, we put it on the mantelpiece.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're working class.
Do you have pink glass swans here?
I'm sure people do.
We
In
have
different ones, maybe.
Yeah, there is a.
We have porcelain stuff.
No, we have
that-
also an icon of a symbol like that. It would be the crying baby. It's a photograph of a child crying. It was,
Yeah, you can look it up in the old city when you're walking
But it's
around.
not.
You'll find a few of them.
Exactly.
And you can find them that, if you turn the ones, that if you turn it this way or that, it changes its,
It's
how do you say, facial,
expression.
yeah.
Sounds good.
But I'd consider sort of using text in a more dominant way than just in the
Yeah.
essay,
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.